Before the story begins, I ask just one thing. Like this video, subscribe if you enjoy unsettling tales, and share in the comments where you're watching from and what time. It's how YouTube knows this story found the right person. Now, shall we begin? My name is Samuel Whitaker. People around here just call me Sam, or that old keeper up at Blackwood Hollow. If they're the kind that pretends not to know me, and truth is, I don't mind. I've spent more of my life among the dead than the living, and I've found they talk less, lie less, and stick to their plots. I've been the groundskeeper of Blackwood Hollow Cemetery for 40 years. It's not much to look at, just a long stretch of fenced-in land at the north edge of the valley, where the pines grow thick and the ground sinks just a little more each winter. The kind of cemetery that doesn't show up on GPS, where the stones lean like old drunks and moss creeps over the names like it's trying to forget them. 40 years. That's longer than I was married, longer than I worked at the plant, longer than I've had cable TV or a working transmission in my truck. In those 40 years, I've buried 342 people, not counting the ones who never got headstones. I've written every name in the old ledger by hand, the same way my father did before me, and his father before him. I've dug in snow. I've dug in mud. I've dug while yellow jackets swarmed, and while thunder cracked so loud I thought the Lord himself was coming for me. But this story isn't about them. This story is about her. Every spring, for 40 years, she came. Same code, same slow steps down the gravel path, same bouquet of violets in her hand, fresh and blooming, even when the last frost hadn't yet lifted from the grass. Always at dawn, always alone, and every time, she'd find me. Didn't matter where I was on the grounds. She'd find me, and she'd ask the same question, in a voice as even as stone. Is my name on the stone yet? The first time she asked, I thought she was grieving maybe a daughter checking on her mother's grave. I told her no, politely. She gave me the smallest smile and walked away into the fog. I never saw where she went. Not once. She never gave me a name, never asked for directions, never visited a specific grave, just came, asked, left. And the next year, like clockwork, she came again, same question, same violets. And after a while, I stopped wondering who she was. She became part of the place, like the rust on the gate hinges or the blackbirds nesting in the northern oaks. It became routine, her presence, her question, my answer. Always no, until this morning. This morning, March 18th, she came early. The fog was still clinging low, the kind that settles like it means to stay all day. I was up near Plot B, checking the frost heave on one of the Henderson graves, when I felt that cold shift in the air, the one I always feel right before she arrives. And there she was, standing at the edge of the gravel, violets in hand. Her face was the same, pale, unreadable, like a painting left out in the rain. But something was different. Her eyes, they were focused, locked on me. For the first time in 40 years, she didn't ask about herself. She said, "Is your name on the stone yet?" Sam. She said my name. She'd never done that before. I didn't speak. My mouth went dry. My knees felt like they wanted to bend, but didn't know how. She tilted her head, not in anger, not in mockery, just a quiet, knowing tilt, like she already knew what I would find. And then she walked away, into the fog. I waited a full minute before I moved. Then I dropped the trowel I'd been holding and made my way back down the path, past the tool shed, past the old chapel that's been condemned since '89, and into the small office at the back of the grounds. That's where the ledger's kept. It's an old thing, leather-bound, thick, heavy as a headstone itself. We don't use computers here. We don't digitize death. My father used to say the dead deserve ink. I pulled it from the locked drawer and laid it open on the desk. The last few pages were blank, as they should have been. But the very last page, the one I swear on my life was empty last night, now had a name written in dark. Wet ink. Samuel Elias Whitaker. Date of death, March 20th, 2025. Just 2 days from now. The vernal equinox. I stared at the page, reached out and touched the ink. Still damp, still bleeding slightly into the fibers, and the handwriting, I recognized it. It was mine, my own loops and stroke, the way I curl my W's and the tiny skip in the H where my knuckle stiffens. But I hadn't written it. I hadn't. Had I? I sat down hard in the old chair. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. I looked up at the window, and there she was, standing beyond the glass, just at the edge of the fog, coat still gray, violets still in hand, and then she was gone. No footprints, no sound, no shadow moving away. I looked back at the page. It was still there. My name, my death, my pen, and tucked beneath that page where I'd never noticed it before was a piece of old paper, yellow, crumpled slightly at the corner. It had been torn from a larger sheet, no lines, just 3 sentences, handwritten in faded ink, in a voice I hadn't heard in nearly 40 years. 3 things you do not write down, but you must always remember. 1. Record every name. 2. Never promise a date. 3. Never walk her to the gate. Signed, E. Whitaker. My father. Dead since 1985. And the ink on that page was fresh. I read those rules over and over. And for the first time in 4 decades, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel. Fear. Because I don't remember ever breaking the rules. But maybe I did. Maybe once. Maybe that's all it takes. Back in 1985, I wasn't anyone special. Just 27. Broke. Bitter. And freshly unemployed from the Black Hollow Mining Co-op when my dad, Ephraim Whitaker, called out of nowhere after 4 years of silence and said, "The gate's still open. Come or don't." I didn't ask for details. Didn't ask if he'd forgiven me for walking out after my mother's funeral. Didn't ask what I'd be doing or for how long. When you've got a repo notice on your front door and a fridge filled with nothing but mustard and old beer, even the graveyard starts to look like a job worth taking. The first time I stepped foot back in Blackwood Hollow Cemetery, it was late March, early thaw. The snow was still melting under the pine shade, and the air had that sharp, copper smell of wet bark and wood smoke. I remember thinking, this place hadn't changed a bit. Dad met me by the tool shed with a cup of black coffee and a nod. No hug. No, how have you been, son? Just, there's a shovel and boots inside. You remember how to use them? I told him I did. That was the beginning of everything. Of the job. Of the rules. Of this slow decay that would eat up my life like ivy on a fence post. But I didn't meet her until a few weeks later. It was a Sunday. Cold. Quiet. The kind of morning where the fog doesn't burn off, just hovers above the soil like it's got nowhere else to be. I just finished raking pine needles off the South Row Plot C when I noticed her. She was standing still, perfectly still, just beyond the low stone wall near the northern plot, facing the graves, like she was reading them. Gray wool coat, buttoned up high, hair pulled back into a low, tight braid, and in her hand, a bouquet of deep purple violets full, fresh, blooming like they had no business doing in March. I didn't see her walk in, didn't hear the gate open, didn't feel her presence until I looked up and there she was, like she'd always been there. At first, I thought she might be a visitor, maybe one of those types who comes to leave flowers for a loved one who passed decades ago. I called out, polite-like, "Morning. Ma'am, cemetery's open till sundown if you need help finding someone." She turned to look at me. Her eyes were gray-blue, not cold, but pale. Her skin had the kind of color you only see in early spring, that thin, washed-out look right before someone gets sick. But it wasn't her expression that caught me. It was her stillness. She didn't blink, didn't sway in the wind, didn't breathe. She just stood there, eyes on mine, like we'd already spoken before and I was late to the conversation. Then, softly calm, like asking about the time, she said, "Is my name on the stone yet?" I didn't know what to say. Hell, I didn't know what she meant. I cleared my throat, stepped closer, and asked her if she had a loved one buried in the north section. Offered to check the records. Told her I was new to the job, still learning the layout. She didn't reply, just tilted her head, ever so slightly, and then, without another word, turned around and walked directly into the fog, and was gone. No sound of footsteps, no creak from the gate, no crunch of gravel, just silence. That night, I told Dad about her, described what she looked like, what she said. He stopped mid-sip of his coffee, stared into the corner of the room for a second too long, then muttered, "Did you walk her to the gate?" I told him no, that she disappeared on her own. He grunted, set the mug down hard. "Then you did right." I asked who she was. He didn't answer, not with words. He stood up, walked to the ledger drawer, and pulled out the big brown book, set it in front of me, and opened to the last filled page. The ink was dry. The names were neat, all accounted for. Then he flipped to the next blank page and pointed. "You see something there?" I looked. Just white paper. "No, sir." He nodded, shut the book, locked it back in the drawer. Good. That was all. I chalked it up to local superstition. A ghost story passed between men who dig more holes than they fill. I figured it was just some drifter or someone deep in grief, acting strange in a strange place. But 2 days later, something happened that took the smugness right out of me. I was logging maintenance notes in the shed when I noticed a name had disappeared from the ledger. Just gone. No scratch out. No TR. No blank space. Gone. Like the ink had never been there in the first place. I remembered writing it. The week before. Thomas Milner. Age 76. Plot B17. He died in his sleep after a long bout of lung cancer. But now nothing. I ran outside, down to B17, heart pounding, trying to laugh it off like a stupid mistake. But when I got there, the stone was missing. No joke, the headstone was gone, the soil undisturbed, the grass grown back as if no one had touched it in years. The only thing left was a soft square of dirt that felt colder than the rest. I never told anyone, not even Dad. But from that day on, I started paying attention to the rules, and I started watching for her. Because she would return. They always return in spring. My father didn't like explaining things. He liked structure, routine. The kind of man who measured his mornings by the number of steps it took to boil coffee, sharpen a shovel, and walk from the tool shed to the gate before the sun hit the chapel ruins. But rules? No, he didn't hand those out. Instead, they came slow. Like frost creeping in through floorboards, you don't feel them at first, but they settle in your bones, whether you like it or not. There were 3 that mattered. I didn't know how much until it was too late. He never sat me down to teach them. He didn't write them on a wall or pin them to the shed door. But I learned them all the same. Because when you work in the dirt long enough, you start to understand what the land expects of you, what it tolerates, and what it won't forgive. Rule 1. Record every name. It sounds simple. Every cemetery has a ledger. We didn't invent that. But our ledger, his ledger, was something different. It wasn't just a list. It wasn't even just a record. It was a contract. Every time someone was buried, their name went in. Full name, date of birth, date of death, plot number. No exceptions. Stillborns, drifters, veterans with no next of kin. Every name, no matter how small, forgotten, or buried by shame, they all went in. I asked him once why we didn't just go digital. Computers were starting to show up at the town clerk's office. He said, "Ink stays. Wires don't." I didn't argue, but it stuck with me. There was a weight to writing by hand, like carving into bark, and every time I wrote a name, I felt like I was sealing something. I remember the first time I forgot. It was a hot June day, maybe 86 or 87. Old man Calvin Payne died of heat stroke out by Rook's Ridge. Sheriff called us, asked if we'd take care of him quick. No family, no funeral, just a body and a pine box. I buried him. Plot F9. Standard depth, nothing unusual. But I was tired, sunbaked, stupid, and I didn't write the name in the book. The next morning, the grave was open, not dug, split. The soil had cracked like something had pushed up from inside, but there was no body, no box. Just the smell of old iron, like blood rusting in a bucket. I filled it back in, didn't say a word. Went back to the shed, took out the ledger, and wrote his name in before I so much as blinked. By the time I got back to the grave that afternoon, it was undisturbed, settled, as if nothing had ever happened. That's when I started to believe Rule 2, never promise a date. This one took longer to understand. Back then, folks still asked me for Saturday burials, or can you have it ready by Friday? That kind of thing. And I always answered, depends on the ground. That wasn't just an excuse, because the ground, the cemetery itself, had moods. Sometimes the soil was soft and clean, and digging went fast. Other days, it fought you, turned dense, unyielding. Rocks where there shouldn't be rocks, mud where it hadn't rained. Once, during a particularly bad winter, the ground at Plot A refused to take a second body. No matter how many hours I dug, the hole collapsed in on itself. I told the widow I'd need another day. She asked me for a specific date. She was grieving, angry, cold, so I said it, just to get her to leave. It'll be ready by Thursday. That night, the power went out in the shed. My truck died. The frost moved in deeper than usual. And Thursday morning, when I went to dig, I found the exact spot caved in like something had already come out. I never saw her again, but someone left her husband's name carved into the bark of a tree just outside the cemetery wall. The letters weren't fresh. They were old, weathered, as if they'd been there for years. I didn't make promises after that, because promises mean certainty, and certainty is an invitation. The kind of invitation something older than us might just accept. Rule 3. Never walk her to the gate. This rule was different. Dad never called it a rule. He never said her, but the meaning was clear the day I broke it. Late one afternoon in 1988, a woman was wandering the South End Plot D, near the hill crying. She looked normal, lost, said she was trying to find her husband's stone. I didn't think anything of it. I helped her, led her toward the gate. She walked slow, dragging her hand along the tops of the stones. When we reached the gravel path, she stopped and said, "Thank you." Then she turned to me and I saw her face shift, just for a moment. Her eyes didn't match. One was blue, the other was black. Not the iris, the whole damn thing. Black as tar. Reflective, like a still pond at midnight. I blinked, and she was gone. I don't mean she walked away. I mean I blinked and she vanished. That night, the temperature dropped 20 degrees. All the light bulbs in the shed burst, and the names on 2 headstones in Plot D were reversed. I had to recarve them myself. And the families, they swore I got them wrong. Swore their parents had never been in those spots. But I remembered. I remembered writing them in the ledger. And I remembered what Dad had said to me years ago, when I was just a kid walking beside him on a foggy morning. If someone follows you to the gate, don't walk with them. Don't lead them out. Let them find their own way. I never understood it until that moment. And after that, I never did it again. I didn't think about those rules for a long time, not until she came back. Every spring, asking her question, "Is my name on the stone yet?" And I always said no, because that was the truth. Until the day she asked me a different question. The day she asked about my name. The day the ledger answered for me. They don't teach you this in any manual. But sometimes the dead move, not their bodies. Not exactly. Not the bones. It's the ground, the plot, the name. Like a hand reaching up and dragging everything 3 feet to the left. The first time I noticed it, I thought I'd made a mistake. It was spring, maybe 1990 or 91. Foggy morning. Typical for March in Blackwood Hollow. I was out early, laying fresh mulch around the headstones before the season's rain made everything swampy. That's when I saw it. Plot 317, supposed to be the resting place of Francis and Edna Mallory. Buried side by side in 1976, was empty. The headstones were gone, not knocked over, not damaged. Gone. At first I thought vandals. We'd had a few break-ins over the years, kids with spray paint. Punks trying to steal old brass from war vet plaques. So I started scanning the area. Found the Mallory stones 40 feet away, by the iron fence near the northern slope. Exactly side by side, same angle, same alignment. Like someone had moved them in the night and reinstalled them with care. But the soil, the grass, it was untouched. No drag marks. No loose dirt. No signs of anything having been lifted or redug. It was like the land had decided they belonged somewhere else. I checked the ledger that night. Plot 317. Blank. Plot 704. Now listed Francis and Edna Mallory in handwriting that wasn't mine. I stared at that page for 10 minutes, ran my fingers over the lines. It looked like my father's writing, but Ephraim had been dead for 6 years. I didn't erase anything. I didn't move anything. I didn't write anything. But the ledger had updated itself, and something about that fact, the quiet certainty of it, disturbed me more than the missing stones. Over the next few years, it happened again, always in spring. Always near the oldest plots, the ones with names that had faded or disappeared entirely. Sometimes a headstone would shift a few feet. Sometimes 2 graves would trade places, even though they belonged to people who died years apart. Sometimes a stone would vanish entirely. And once, just once, I found a new marker. Not a modern one, not something carved in granite. This was iron, black and thin, bent at the top like an old shepherd's hook, the kind you'd see in a Civil War graveyard. It wasn't there the day before. The engraving read, "Bound below." No name, no date, no symbol, just those two words, etched shallow and rusted over. I checked the records. Nothing. No recent burials in that quadrant. No requests. No funeral director on file. That marker wasn't in the book. I left it alone. Didn't touch it. Didn't trim the grass around it. Didn't speak its location out loud. Because by then, I'd come to understand some things get moved because they want to be. A few years later, I got a call from Mrs. Hargrove at the Blackwood Public Library. She said she was cataloging some of the old town archives papers from the 1800s that had been in storage since the courthouse fire. She found something she thought I should see. When I arrived, she handed me a slim, leather-bound notebook wrapped in twine. No name on the cover. Inside, the handwriting was spidery and stiff, someone with arthritis. Probably, or writing in a hurry. It was a journal, written by a man named Peter Culver, dated 1873. He was, as it turns out, a gravedigger, not groundskeeper, not memorial custodian, gravedigger. Back then, titles didn't get dressed up. He worked the very same land I did, described the same gate, the same iron fence, the same slope of the hollow, the same fog. His entries were short, blunt, efficient, but about halfway through, one page stopped me cold. Some of the names do not stay put. They move when spring returns. It is not the wind. It is not mischief. It is something older. The ground reclaims its mistakes. I tried to move one back. It did not let me. The dirt was soft, but the roots bled. I reread those lines 5 times before I closed the book. When I looked up, Miss Hargrove was staring at me, not curious, not scholarly, worried. "Do you know what he meant?" she asked. I told her I didn't. She slipped me a folded piece of paper as I turned to leave, said it had been tucked in the back of the journal. When I opened it, 5 words were scrawled in pencil, fresh pencil. Not 1800s. They're still watching. Be careful. No signature. No date. No explanation. That was the year I stopped walking the northern edge of the property after dark. And I started keeping a second map. Not a physical one, not written on paper. Just in my head. Where things were. Where they had been. Where they moved. And most importantly, what came back. Because there were graves in that part of the cemetery that hadn't been visited in decades. Graves that should have been covered in moss and rot. But in spring, after the thaw, some of them looked new, fresh, like the earth had just accepted a name again, or maybe returned one. I always kept the cemetery ledger locked in a steel cabinet behind the tool shed. It wasn't out of paranoia. It was tradition. My father did it. His father before him. We were taught the dead deserve their records kept sacred, written by hand, stored away from sun and storm. We didn't use computers. Just an old black ledger with leather covers, thick yellow pages, and a brass clasp that clicked shut like a coffin lid. Every plot, every name, every date, written in ink. No whiteout, no scribbles. You make a mistake, you start over. That was the rule. Until the day the book started writing itself. It began with something small, a name correction. I was inspecting the northwestern quadrant after a week of heavy rain. A few graves had sunk slightly, water pooling near the foundations. I made notes, took photos, Routine stuff. Plot 5 to 21 belonged to Ruth Ann McAllister. Buried, 1964. Always had. Except when I came back to the shed and opened the ledger, it didn't say Ruth Ann anymore. It said Ruth Ann McAllister. Died 1967. Reinterred. That last word stopped me cold. Reinterred. We don't do that without a court order. No one had filed one. No one had dug her up. Hell, we'd never even touched that plot since I was a kid. But the handwriting, it was perfect, neat, slanted just like mine. Only not exactly like mine. I compared it to my last entry, same pen, same pressure. But something about the loops in the G's and the tail of the R, they felt older. Like the way Ephraim used to write when he was tired. When he was near the end, I flipped back a few pages. More changes. Plot 314. Vacant had been crossed out and replaced with a name I didn't recognize, Martha Peake. Died 1848. Returned spring 92. Plot 907. A second name added beneath the original, like a roommate in a dorm. No exhumation request. No paperwork. And in the margin of page 64, a single phrase in red ink. The ground knows what belongs. I slammed the book shut, locked the shed, went home. Didn't sleep. The next morning, I checked the local archive. No records for Martha Peake. No obits. No headstone in the county database. But I couldn't shake the name. It sounded familiar. Like something I'd heard whispered when I was a boy. During storms, when the town's power flickered and old men at the tavern would talk a little too loud. That night, I found a rusted shoebox in the attic. Inside were yellowed papers, receipts, old church bulletins, and one funeral notice. Barely legible. Memorial for Martha Peake, 1848. Denied by town council due to incident at Black Hollow Cemetery. No further details. Just a date, May 7th, 1848. I looked at the calendar. May 7th was tomorrow. That night, I stayed at the cemetery. I didn't tell Clara. Didn't want to scare her. She was already worrying too much Ellie had started sleepwalking again. And the house creaked like it had lungs. I set up a folding chair near the plot marked 3 to 14. Brought coffee. A flashlight. The ledger. 38. My dad left me. At 11:47 p. My. The wind died. The fog got thicker. And the ground began to shift. Not shake. Not tremble. Shift. Like something underneath was rolling over in its sleep. I stood up, heart thudding. A thin crack formed down the center of the plot, not in the soil and the grass itself, like it had been sliced open by invisible hands, and from beneath, a breath, not loud, not moaning, just steady, wet, the kind of breath you hear in a hospital room seconds before the flatline. I opened the ledger. Blank paid. I blinked. And then, the pen moved. I swear to God. The pen moved by itself, curling across the page like it was being dragged by something unseen. No hand. No shadow. Just motion. It wrote, Martha Peake died in fire. Bound in wrong ground. Returned by debt. Spring 1992. Claim. The final word bled off the edge of the page. I dropped the book, ran. Didn't stop until I hit the front gate. The next morning, I returned. The plot looked untouched. No crack, no disturbed soil. But when I opened the ledger again, the writing was still there. Only now, beneath claim, someone had added a note. Do not bury again. That was the day I stopped using ink. From then on, I logged every burial in pencil. Light. Erasable. Because sometimes the ground changes its mind, and sometimes the debt that rises isn't done yet. She started coming every spring, always around the same time, late April or early May, when the dogwoods bloomed and the grass came in thick and wet. Too early to mow. She'd walk in from the tree line near the western slope. Never through the front gate. Never by car. Just appear. Like mist from the creek. She wore the same thing every year. A faded lavender dress. Hem trailing in the dew. White gloves. The kind you only see in old photos. And a black ribbon tied at her throat. Delicate as a breath. Her hair was dark. Not gray. Not white. Not the faded straw color old women get. But black raven, black like it had no business being real. She didn't look young. But she didn't look right either. She looked like a memory wearing skin. The first year, I thought she was a relative. A great niece or granddaughter come to pay respects. She walked with purpose. Right to plot 314. And stood there for 20 minutes. Never wept. Never knelt. Just stared. When I approached her slow. Cautious, she turned before I spoke and said something I've never forgotten. "Is my name on the stone yet?" I blinked. Asked her to repeat it. She just smiled. Thin. Like she knew something I didn't. Then walked away. Same direction she came. Back into the tree. The second year, I watched from a distance. Same woman. Same dress. Same gloves. Same plot. I hid behind the north tool shed, pretending to work on the mower, but I wasn't fooling anyone. She stood there longer that time. 30 minutes. Maybe more. Then turned again slow. Graceful and asked the air, "Is it there now?" I didn't answer. Didn't know how to. There was no name on that stone. Hell. There was no stone at all. Just a marker. Rusted iron. No carving. No inscription. Just weeds and rot and earth that wouldn't stay still. By the third year, I stopped pretending I could ignore her. I waited by the gate. When she arrived, she paused. Looked at me. Not startled. Not annoyed. Just polite. "Good morning," she said. As if we were neighbors meeting on the sidewalk. Lovely weather. I asked if I could help her find someone. She tilted her head a little to the left. "I'm already there, Mr. Whitaker. I'm just waiting on the name." I asked what she meant. She didn't answer. I asked her name. She smiled, but didn't speak, just turned and walked to 314. I stood there, frozen. One hand on the gate, one on the shovel. I didn't follow. I was afraid that if I did, I'd forget my own name. This went on for 7 years. Always spring. Always lavender. Sometimes she'd hum to herself. Old tune, wartime songs. Sometimes spirituals I recognized from my father's records. A few times, she brought flowers. Not store-bought. Hand-picked. Wildflowers and purple clover. Once, a bunch of black-eyed Susans. Tied with red thread, she never laid them on the grave. Always beside it. Just out of reach. As if the ground might bite her. In 2003, I finally broke. Ellie was in high school by then. Clara had started sleeping on the couch. Said my snoring kept her up, but we both knew it was more than that. I'd wake in cold sweats, whispering things I couldn't remember by morning. Names I hadn't written. I needed answers. So I stayed late, waited in the rain. She came at dusk, the sky bruised purple. The trees whispering like they were nervous. And this time, I stepped between her and the grave. I said, "Ma'am, I don't know who you are, but you can't keep coming here like this. It's not right." She looked at me with eyes that didn't blink enough. "You're the keeper, aren't you?" "I'm just the caretaker." She smiled again, wider this time. Not cruel. Not kind. Just wide. Caretaker. Keeper. Watchman. It's all the same. Your father made a promise. And so did his. And now it's yours. What promise? She pointed to the ground. To remember what the town forgets. To name what the stones won't. Then, she stepped forward. Closer than ever. Close enough that I could see her skin was wrong. Not rotted. Not dead. Just empty. Like a photo of a person. Stretched across something hollow. She leaned in and whispered, "When the name appears, I'll rest. But if the grave stays blank, the debt stays open." Then she was gone. Not walked away. Not vanished. Just not there anymore. The next day, I checked the ledger. Page 64, the one with Martha Peak, now had a second line. Unknown woman. Returned annually. Waiting for name. I didn't write it, but the ink was still wet. I stopped cutting the grass near plot 314 that year. It wasn't official. I didn't mark it on the map or tell the city council. I just let the mower idle down when I came to that slope, and trimmed the border like it was someone else's land. The weeds grew fast there, faster than the rest of the cemetery, as if the earth wanted to hide whatever lay beneath. Every once in a while, someone would ask why that section looked so wild. I'd lie, say the mower was too wide, or the ground was too soft for the wheels. No one pushed. People in hollow pines know when to stop asking, but the truth, I was scared the grass might bleed if I cut it. That summer, I started digging through the old cemetery records. Not the paper ledgers in the shed, those were spotty at best. I mean the real archives, the stuff my grandfather kept in the cellar beneath the caretaker's office, the things he told me never to read alone. A row of leather-bound journals, some so brittle the pages crumbled at the touch, others damp with mildew. But they were dated, and I found one that matched 1904-1912. Inside, I found his handwriting. Strong, clean cursive. He recorded every burial, every plot sale, even which days the crows wouldn't land on certain headstones. And then, in the margin of one yellowed page, I found this. Plot 3-14, not listed in the church registry. Soil always unsettled. Requests to relocate denied. A woman visits. Asks the same question each spring. Says she's not done yet. My blood turned cold. This wasn't new. This had happened before. I looked for more. Checked every book, every page. There were mentions scattered over decades. Lavender dress. Appears from tree line. Does not leave footprints. In 1956, my father wrote this. She came again today. Same voice. Same words. I asked her name. She just smiled. I think she's waiting for me now. I spent the next week walking the cemetery at night. I didn't tell Clara. Didn't tell Ellie. Just waited until they were asleep. Grabbed my lantern and wandered the headstones like a man in a dream. Nothing ever happened on those walks, but I felt it. Like pressure behind the eyes. Like the ground was listening. On the 5th night, I found a stone I'd never noticed before. No name. No dates. Just carved words in a circle. Memory owes a debt the grave cannot pay. I ran my hand along the grooves. They were deep. Old. Worn smooth by wind and time. And right below it, faint but fresh, was a set of footprints, leading from the stone to nowhere. I brought it up with the church secretary the next morning. Asked about unmarked graves, about forgotten plots. She went pale. Said the church used to bury certain people on unconsecrated land. People who weren't welcome. The mentally ill. The unwanted. The strange. I asked where that land was. She wouldn't answer. But her hands were shaking when she pointed in the general direction of 314. That night, the air turned. I don't know how else to say it. It was like the season shifted in a single breath. One moment, it was summer. The next, I could see my breath in the air. I lit the lantern, headed to the plot. The wind had kicked up, howling through the pines, and I swear the trees leaned in as I passed like they were listening. When I reached the grave, the earth looked freshly turned. I hadn't touched it. No one had. But the soil was soft, damp, like something had been digging up. I dropped to my knees, brushed the dirt aside with bare hands. No stone, just the iron marker, and under it, a note, weather-worn and yellowed, tucked in a rusted tin. It read, "When the name appears, the debt is closed. Until then, remember her? Speak for her, or she'll speak for herself." There was no signature, but the handwriting matched the journals. I went home, burned the clothes I wore, didn't sleep. That weekend, I carved a name into a blank piece of slate. No tools, just a pocket knife. I didn't know the name, not really, so I wrote what she asked for. "Am I here yet?" I placed it beside the marker. Just a placeholder, just a whisper. But when I stood up, the air felt lighter, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel watched. I should have let it go. Should have buried the fake headstone and walked away. Sealed the shed, locked the gates, taken Clara and Ellie and gone somewhere warm, somewhere with light. But I couldn't, because that night, the ledger changed again. It was just past midnight when I opened the old caretaker's book, the one passed down through blood and boots. I hadn't touched it since the spring visit, since her voice cracked the air and carved her question into my chest. But something had nudged me awake. I lit the lantern, poured a finger of whiskey, and flipped to the back pages. My hands trembled, not from fear, from expectation. And there it was, a new entry. Page 237, written in my own handwriting, but I hadn't written it. Plot 314, status, pending, name, unknown woman, remark, spoke again, close now. The name is circling. Caretaker heard whispers. Ledger responding. My chest tightened. I reread the line. Once, twice. They didn't fade, didn't smudge. They were as real as the coffee stain 2 pages over. The ledger had written back. I tried to trace at pen pressure, ink consistency, but every stroke felt too perfect, too deliberate, like someone else had used my hand while I was sleeping. I slammed the book shut, told myself I was tired, too much whiskey, too many nights alone with the dead. But when I looked at the window above the desk, there was fog on the inside of the glass. The next morning, I drove to the library. Not the town one, the historical archive tucked behind the old train station. The kind of place that still smells like glue and mildew, where everything's cataloged in dusty drawers and brittle folders. I asked for anything related to plot 314. The woman at the desk, Mrs. Breen, gave me a look, the kind you reserve for someone asking about buried bombs. She brought me 2 manila envelopes, no labels, just decades-old photocopies and a single photograph. Black and white, badly faded. In it, I saw a woman in a lavender dress, standing by a headstone that hadn't been erected yet. The date in the corner read, May 1933. The photo haunted me. Her posture was the same, her expression calm, unreadable, like she'd already lived 100 springs and knew 100 more were coming. Behind her stood a man I recognized from childhood photos, my grandfather, Owen Whitaker. Back straight, eyes locked on the woman like he didn't know whether to speak or flee. The caption on the back was written in tight cursive. She asked again. Owen didn't answer. The wind howled all night. Inside the envelope, I also found pages torn from older ledger's entries my father must have removed. Each one was about her. Different wording. Same dread. She does not age. The stone remains blank. 1 year. She came twice. We cannot name what won't stay buried. And then one final note. Folded small and tucked inside a sealed letter. In my father's handwriting. Sam, if you ever find this, listen carefully. The ledger listens too. Once it starts writing back, it doesn't stop. The only way to end it is to give her what she's owed. But be careful. If you guess wrong, she starts to write you in. That night, I left the ledger open on my desk just to test it, just to see. I placed a single sheet of blank paper on top, wrote one line. Who is she? Blew out the lamp, locked the door, didn't sleep. At dawn, I returned, breath caught in my throat. The paper was still there, but not blank, written in the same perfect cursive as before. She has many names, but one dead, and one voice beneath it. A second line, still wet. Is your name on the stone yet? I dropped the page like it burned. Some stories you grow up hearing just to be scared. Others, they grow into you. You stop telling them because you're afraid they might answer back. That spring, she came earlier than usual, April 2nd. Snow still clung to the pine roots, ground half frozen. The wind smelled like rusted iron and thawed bones. I was resetting a fence post on the western boundary, pretending to work, pretending not to look at plot 314. But my neck stiffened anyway because I felt her before I saw her. She didn't walk through the gate. She never did. She was just there. Same dress. Same braid down her shoulder. Same stillness. Like she wasn't subject to time. But this year, there was something different. She wore a black ribbon tied at her throat. And for the first time, she smiled. I didn't approach. I couldn't. Not after the ledger. Not after my father's letter. I just stood by the fence, holding the hammer like a shield. The silence stretched between us, heavy and old. And then she said it. Soft, but clear. You still haven't answered. My mouth went dry. I wanted to ask 100 questions, her name, her purpose, her death, but all I managed was, what happens if I do? She turned her head toward the stone. Still blank, no chisel marks, no lichen, even. Then I can rest. That was the last thing she said. She didn't leave. She unfolded, like the air itself wrapped around her, and she wasn't standing there anymore. That night, I couldn't sit still, couldn't eat, couldn't even look Clara in the eye. I dug through my father's shed boxes he hadn't opened since the 80s, dusty ledgers, broken nameplate, old cemetery maps drawn by hand. In one of them, near the edge of the paper, someone had circled plot 314 in red and scribbled a phrase I'll never forget. Where her name belongs. Yours may go instead. I stayed up until dawn cataloging every name buried near the plot. There were no women with blank stones. No records missing. No unclaimed remains. She didn't belong to the cemetery's history. She belonged to its rules. A week later, I was cleaning debris off the plot when I saw something poking out of the soil. half buried beneath rotted leaves and pine needles. I pulled it loose. It was a black ribbon, just like the one she wore. Only this one was soaked in blood. I staggered back, dropped it. The wind caught it and sent it spiraling toward the woods where it snagged on a low-hanging branch, fluttering like a signal. I didn't think. I followed. The forest behind Hollow Cemetery is old. Not wild, just forgotten. I'd played there as a kid, back before the council fenced it off for erosion concerns. But it had always felt off, like the trees were listening. The deeper I went, the quieter it got. No bird, no wind, just my boots crunching over dead pine needles and the whisper of that ribbon ahead. And then I saw it, a small clearing. At the center, an identical gravestone, perfectly blank. No flowers, no dirt pile, just moss-covered stone, waiting. And leaning against it another ribbon, clean this time. I knelt, breath ragged, heart pounding, and turned it over in my hand. Someone had stitched something into the fabric. Faint, worn, but still legible. I was forgotten, so I waited. I spun around, expecting her behind me. But there was only the wind, only the forest, and 1,000 trees that had forgotten how to fall. I left the ribbon there. Didn't tell Clara. Didn't log it in the ledger. But I wrote something on the shed wall that night. A line I knew wasn't mine. But I couldn't stop my hand from scrawling it in chalk. If you don't choose, the pine will. There's a sound I've only heard once in my life. It's not the wind through trees. Not exactly. Not a voice either. It's somewhere in between, like the pines breathing together. They don't whisper like oaks or rustle like maples. Pines, they murmur, like they're old and tired but still listening, still remembering. That spring, I started hearing them, not every night. Just after the frost melted, after I passed plot 314 on my way to the tool shed, the air would feel thicker, charged, like the barometric pressure dropped and the sound would come. Not from above, from below. Clara said I was imagining things, said I needed to spend less time around dead things and more time in the land of the living. Ellie had started drawing strange pictures of trees with faces, of a man without one, of a stone with no name and a girl pointing at it. Clara thought they were just childhood oddities, but I knew better. I'd been leaving fresh flowers on the blank stone every week now. No one told me to. It just felt necessary. Like a pact I hadn't agreed to but was bound by anyway. And every time, I'd find a new offering left behind a pine cone, placed with care. A dried marigold. Once, an antique button caked in rust. The grave was responding. One morning, I decided to test it. I didn't leave the flowers. I skipped the ritual. Just walked past, shovel in hand, heart pounding like I'd stepped over a line drawn in ash. That night, our shed burned down. No signs of arson, no lightning, no electrical wiring, just ash, soaked in the scent of burnt pine and something else, something foul. Like decay that had been buried too long. Only one thing survived the fire. A piece of charred wood from the tool bench. On it, scrawled in my father's handwriting he hadn't used in over 20 years, was a sentence. Don't forget her again. The next day, I dug into the cemetery's oldest archives, locked in the township vault. Old, brittle pages, ledger books bound in leather and fear, names from the 1700s forward. I found something. A name scratched out so aggressively the paper tore. Margaret Rowan. Died? Spring, 1851. Buried. Plot unknown. Status: removed. There was a note beside her record, short, smudged, written in a different hand. The pine took her back. She wouldn't keep quiet. That night, I dreamed of her for the first time. But in the dream, she didn't look like the woman I'd seen every spring. She was younger, pale, eyes blacked out, lips stitched shut. She stood among the trees and held up the black ribbon, now soaked in blood, now moving like a snake in her hands. And behind her, the pines leaned in. They weren't trees anymore. They were watching. I woke up choking, not metaphorically. I couldn't breathe. Something was caught in my throat. Clara called 911. But by the time the medics arrived, it was gone. I coughed up dirt, actual dirt, and in it, tangled around my tongue like a worm, was a thin black thread. The next morning, plot 314 had changed. The stone still blank was cracked down the middle, a shallow split, as if pressure from underneath had tried to break free, and someone not me had left fresh violets at its base. I didn't touch them. I didn't stay long. But I remember the wind, the way it shifted, and the way the pine branches moved. Not side to side, but closer. I stopped sleeping well after that. Started locking the house twice. Started burying tools in places only I knew. Started carrying iron nails in my pocket, old folklore I never believed in until I needed to. And every spring, like clockwork, the visits would come again. But the question had changed. She no longer asked, "Is my name on the stone yet?" Now, she asked, "Have you seen yours?" I'd been staring at the same names in that damn cemetery ledger for nearly 2 decades. Josephine Klein, Reverend Marcus Vale, the twin Delaney girls. I could recite them in my sleep. I'd updated the book by hand every time someone new joined the earth. But on the second Thursday of March 2009, I opened the ledger and found a page I didn't write. At first, I thought maybe I was losing it. Too much overtime. Too many sleepless nights thinking about pines that leaned in when the wind was still, and grave markers that pulsed with invisible breath. But there it was. A fresh page. Cream-colored. Clean. Untouched by dust. At the top, in looping black ink, those yet to join. Beneath it, only 3 names: Clara Whitaker, Eleanor Whitaker, Samuel Whitaker. The ink was still wet. I slammed the book shut like it burned me. It felt wrong, not just morbid, but intimate in a way the dead shouldn't be. This wasn't some anonymous list. This was a message. The kind of list a thing writes when it's choosing. I flipped back through the ledger, hunting for handwriting styles, patterns, and I found something even stranger. In the far corner of the very first page, nearly invisible unless you knew to look for it, was a tiny black pinhole. Something had been added, inserted, almost like a new heart sewn into an old body. The ink was not ballpoint, not felt tip. It was thicker, like blood, drying. I asked around discreetly town hall, the postmaster, even Ed Grayson, the old funeral director. No one had updated the book, and no one should have had access to the vault. Only me. So I tested it. I took the page home. I burned it in our fireplace, watched the names curl in flame and disappear into ash. The next morning, back at the cemetery, the ledger was intact. Same fresh page. Same 3 names. No scorch marks. No trace I ever removed it. That night, Clara dreamt of Eleanor choking on dirt. The next night, she woke up screaming, not from a dream, but from a sound, a whisper, coming from the hallway. I checked every room. Nothing. But when I turned to walk back to bed, I saw it. on the mirror near the stairs. Scrawled in what looked like mud from the cemetery was a single word: soon. I took Ellie to my mother's house in Altoona for the weekend. Told Clara it was just to get her some clean mountain air, but we both knew better. And when I got back, alone, I went to the cemetery at midnight, took a lantern and a crowbar and opened the maintenance shed where we kept old burial tools and frost blankets. The ledger was waiting on the bench, open to the same page. But this time, the list was longer. 7 names now, 4 more than yesterday. I didn't recognize the new ones, but I recognized the 8th space at the bottom. It was empty, just a flicker of ink, like something still writing. I closed the book. I didn't burn it this time, didn't try to tear it out again. Instead, I buried it, took the ledger to the north fence, the oldest, least visited corner of Hollow Pines. I dug a hole 6 feet deep, deeper than regulation, laid it down like a corpse, poured salt over it, iron nail, a rosary, then covered it all back up. I left a stone at the top not marked, just a circle. Nothing supernatural happened. No lightning, no screaming trees, just silence. And I thought, maybe it was done, until Ellie came back from Altoona, handed me a drawing she made at Grandma's, and in it was the cemetery, and a tree that bled from the bark, and a book in the dirt, with our names in it, and one more, Maggie. There's a moment, if you've dug graves long enough, when you can tell the earth doesn't want to be opened. It goes still, dense, like it's clenching. And if you press on, it presses back. That spring, the soil turned against me. It began with the roots. At first, they were just in the way thick pine tendrils that seemed to twist into every plot I was assigned to dig. But after a while, I noticed they weren't growing out from trees. They were coming up, like veins from the bones below, and they hummed, low, soft, the kind of sound you feel in your sternum more than your ears. The first time I heard it, I blamed dehydration. The second time, I quit drinking coffee. The third time, I accepted it. The roots were alive, and they were watching. One afternoon, as I was digging near plot 712, my shovel struck something soft, not dirt, not stone. I knelt down, brushed it clean, and found what looked like a lock of hair. Human, coarse, tied with a black thread. I recoiled, and when I looked up, the pine trees had shifted, not visibly, but spatially. They were closer than they'd been. I marked the site and called Ed Grayson. He didn't even blink. Some things don't stay buried. You know that. Sam. He hung up before I could ask what the hell he meant. The next morning, the lock of hair was gone. So was my marker flag. But in its place, a stone I'd never seen before. Uncut. No engraving. Just sitting there like it had always belonged. At its base, growing wild and deliberate, was a sprig of foxglove, a deadly flower. Hallucinogenic, beautiful, and tied to its stalk a ribbon, black. That night, I woke to the sound of roots cracking through drywall. The corner of our bedroom above the baseboard had split open, clean as a surgical line. Behind it, soil, not insulation, not pipes, soil. I shoved furniture against the wall, told Clara it was a bad foundation issue. She didn't believe me, but didn't push. She just said, softly, "It's getting closer." "Isn't it?" I didn't answer, because the truth was louder than any lie. The next day, I returned to plot 314. Margaret's stone hadn't changed, still blank, still cold. still waiting. But now, the earth around it had heaved, as if something underneath had turned over in its sleep. And along the edge of the stone, carved so faintly it caught only in certain angles of sunlight, was a question. Would you die to forget? That night, I had a visitor. Not her. Someone else. A man. Tall. Thin. Dressed in all black. Skin the color of smoke and ash. No hat. No hair. And no face. Not a mask of void. He stood in the hallway between Ellie's room and mine. Silent. Unmoving. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't speak. Only when I blinked did he vanish like smoke sucked into a vent. But in his place, on the hallway floor, was the cemetery ledger, the same one I had buried with salt and iron, open to the same page, now with one more name written at the bottom, Margaret Rowan, and beside it, in blood-red ink, Dad acknowledged. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room with a shotgun and a Bible, staring at the hallway until the sun came up. Nothing came. Nothing moved. But outside, in the front yard, where I had planted grass the fall before the sod had been pushed up from underneath, and in the dirt, carved deep by something with nails or claws, was a message. Roots don't forget. There's a difference between a child's imagination and a child's memory. One grows wild, the other grows wrong. I'd always thought Ellie's drawings were the first kind. You know, kids making sense of the world through crayon and scrawl. But one spring morning, just a week after the hallway man appeared, I found something that made my hands go cold. She had left it on the kitchen table, a page torn from her sketch pad, drawn in smudged pencil, not her usual rainbow mess. It showed our house perfectly outlined, and underneath it, roots like veins, twisting up through the floorboards, and in the center of the roots, a face. Not mine, not Clara's, hers, Margaret's. Except I'd never told Ellie her name, never spoke it around her, never showed her a photo. But there she was drawn just like the newspaper clipping I kept in the shed, buried under my father's old boots. I sat Ellie down that night, asked her gently, "Sweetheart, where did you see this lady?" She didn't look up from her cereal. She watches me sleep sometimes. Says she used to know you. I stared at her for a long time. My first thought wasn't ghosts. It was something darker, trauma. Sleepwalking. A child's brain trying to explain the creaks and groans of an old house. But then Ellie said one more thing. She's sad because you forgot her name, and that's when the spoon fell from my hand. Because that exact sentence was what Margaret had whispered to me in the dream. In '95, 15 years ago. That night, I checked the crawl space. I don't know what I expected to find. Footprints, dead animals. Evidence that maybe I was just cracking under the pressure. What I found instead was worse. A single stone no larger than a fist buried just beneath the loose dirt. I pulled it out. It was warm. Too warm. And carved into it the same symbol from the cemetery's oldest section. A circle with roots splitting downward and a mouth in the center. Except now, that mouth had teeth. I threw the stone into the creek behind our property. But that night, the pipes groaned like breath, and the walls of Ellie's room began to peel at the corners. Clara wanted to leave. "I'm taking Ellie to my sister's," she said one morning, packing bags with a kind of fury that only fear can sharpen. "Whatever this is, it's in this house. It's in you. Sam." I didn't fight her, because she was right. It was in me. Always had been. Since that day in 1985, when I first saw her by the rowan tree, I kissed Ellie on the forehead, told her to listen to her mom, Told her I'd call every day. And I meant it. Until that night. At exactly 2:14 a.m., my phone rang. Not a number. Just unknown route. I didn't pick up. But the voicemail that followed, it was Ellie's voice. And she whispered, "Daddy, she's here. She's not mad anymore. But she wants to come home." The call ended with a soft thump, like a shovel against wood. And when I replayed it, that sound repeated 3 times. Thump, thump, thump. The same rhythm I heard in 1998. The same I'd spent years trying to forget. I called Clara. No answer. I got in the truck and drove 3 towns over to her sister's house. When I arrived, the lights were on. Door wide open. But no one home. The only thing out of place, Ellie's drawing. Pinned to the front door with a rusted nail. Same house. Same roots. Same face. Except this time, my name was carved on the forehead of the face beneath the floor. I drove back to Hollow Pines in silence. Not the quiet kind. The kind that hisses behind your ears. Like something's waiting to speak when you're finally alone. The drawing was on the passenger seat. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away, because part of me knew somehow it belonged here. In this truck, in this story. Like it had always been. By the time I pulled into the cemetery's gravel road, it was 4:03 a.m. And that's when the shaking started. Not from the earth, but from me. Not fear. Not exhaustion. But memory. Only it wasn't mine. I parked beside the caretaker's shed, stumbled out into the thick April fog, and made my way to the oldest section, the one behind the iron gate we never unlock. I had the key. Always did, but I never used it. Tonight, I didn't need to. The gate was already open, and standing just beyond it, where the moonlight split through the pines, was a man in a black coat, broad shoulders. Clean boots, silver shovel in hand. He wasn't real. Couldn't be, because he looked just like a photo my father once showed me of his father, Thomas Whitaker. Died 1952. But the man in front of me, he blinked. "You finally heard it, didn't you?" he said, voice like dry gravel. The thump. I should have run, should have screamed, but instead, I stepped forward, as if pulled. "Who are you?" I asked. He tilted his head. "You already know. You buried me." And then he was gone. Not vanished, not in smoke. He simply stepped backward, into the earth, like it swallowed him whole. I fell to my knees beside the plot. There was no headstone, just a mound of grass, old, wild, untouched, and a single rusted plaque, half buried in the moss. Whitaker unwritten. I reached for it, and that's when it hit me. Not memory, not vision, but insertion. I saw my father in 1982 whispering to the mayor in the shed. Saw them place a wrapped bundle beneath plot 9B. Saw them seal the dirt with a kiss and a prayer, hands trembling. I saw myself aged 10 walking past the rowan tree and seeing her for the first time. Long before 1985. I saw Margaret. But her name wasn't Margaret. It was Marrow. And she had been buried 13 times by 13 Whitakers. Every 30 years. To keep the ground fed. I staggered back. Palms scraped. Heart racing. This wasn't folklore. It was protocol. A deal. A family tradition. We didn't just bury the dead in Hollow Pines. We buried memory. We rewrote lineage. I returned to the shed, tore it apart, shoved shelves, cracked open the floorboards. And there, nailed into the underside of the foundation, was a book bound in pine bark. Pages stitched with wire. The cover bore no title, just a handprint burned into the wood. Inside were names, dates, symbols, blood rubbings, and a single passage, written in dozens of handwritings, each one a Whitaker. The land remembers what we forget. The root feeds on the lie. Every 30 spring, the pact must be renewed. A body, a name, a keeper. Without them, the stone will rise, and the dead will walk back into their homes, wondering why their beds are warm. I flipped to the last page. My name was already there, dated April 17th, 2010. Today, but the ink wasn't dry. It was still bleeding. I stared at the book, then out the shed's window, toward the old section. The fog hadn't lifted, and now, shapes were moving in it slow, crooked, familiar. Figures in suits, in gowns, in coffins, all of them heading back toward town. I slammed the book shut, grabbed my shovel, and whispered the one thing I never thought I'd say again. I'm ready to dig. It was 5:12 a.m. when I realized the ground was choosing, not waiting, not asking, choosing, and it had already decided who it wanted. I sat alone in the shed, the book still warm in my hands. That bleeding ink had stopped flowing, frozen in place like it knew I'd seen it. My name, my date. But something didn't fit. If the pact called for a body, a name, and a keeper every 30 years, then why was I still breathing? I turned the page back. The last entry before mine was from 1980. Name, David Whitaker. Buried, Plot 9B. Keeper, Thomas Whitaker. Offering, Marrow. I stared at the offering column. Marrow. The same name that echoed in the voice of the girl who haunted me every spring. Is my name on the stone yet? She wasn't asking about a stone. She was asking if her debt had been paid. I flipped further. In 1950, another entry. Name, Margaret Marrow. Bury, no. Offering, refuse. Next page. 1951. Name, Thomas Whitaker. Buried, yes. Keeper, James Whitaker. And below that, smeared and scratched, someone had written, if she is not buried, one of us must be. That was it. That was the rule my family never passed down. If the offering is refused, the debt falls to blood. It was never about her. It was always about us. I grabbed the keys, the old iron shovel, and the journal, stormed outside. The fog was lifting, just slightly, and in the distance down past Plot 9B I could see them. 3 figures, one uncrouched, 2 standing. Clara, Ellie, and her. My legs moved faster than they had in years. Gravel kicked, mud sloshed. The wind howled like it remembered something I didn't. By the time I reached the fence, Ellie turned to me. Her eyes weren't afraid. They weren't crying. They were calm. Daddy, she said. She wants to go home now. Clara was frozen, one hand clutching our daughter's shoulder, the other holding something small and silver. The pendant. Margaret's pendant. The one we thought Ellie found in the dirt. But it wasn't hers to find. It was hers to carry. And suddenly, I knew. Ellie was the name the land wanted now. The debt had passed. 30 years. One body. One name. No, I whispered, rushing forward. No. 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 But Margaret raised her hand. Not to me. To Ellie. She touched my daughter's cheek, gentle as rain, her voice like a wind chime in a thunderstorm. This isn't yours yet. You're just the voice." Then she turned to me. Her eyes weren't angry. They were resigned. "Finish it. Please." She stepped toward the plot. Plot 9B. No shovel. No scream. Just one soft sigh as she lowered herself down into the dirt. The ground didn't open. It simply accepted her. Like it knew she belonged. Like it had always waited. I dropped to my knees, dug until my hands bled. No ritual. No words. Just shovel and soil. Ellie held Clara's hand in the fog behind me, watching in silence as I buried the woman I had spent my entire adult life trying to understand and trying to forget. By sunrise, she was gone, and on the plaque above plot 9B, a new engraving burned itself into the iron. Margaret Marrow, 1910. The debt has been paid. I collapsed beside it, breathing hard, eyes stinging. Ellie walked over, sat beside me. "Is it over?" she asked. I nodded. For now, but in the wind, as the last fog rolled out, I heard her voice one final time, "See you in 30 years." And I smiled, because I knew what I had to do. They say time heals all things, but in Hollow Pines, time just hides things. And sometimes, only for a while. It's been 10 years since I buried Margaret. 10 years since the fog lifted, the whispering stopped, and the cemetery slept again. Ellie's 16 now. Bright. Quiet. Wears headphones all day. And pretends she doesn't remember a thing about that spring morning in 2010. I let her believe that. Because that's what keepers do. We let them forget. We carry the memory so they don't have to. Clara and I talked about moving tried once. Got as far as Altoona before the car just died on the interstate. She never said a word, but she knew. Deep down, she knew Hollow Pines wouldn't let us go. So I stayed. Shovel still in hand. Ledger still locked in the shed. Every spring, I walk to plot 9B and place a rose. Not because I owe her anything anymore, but because I understand her now. She didn't haunt me. She was waiting for someone to see her, to put her name where it belonged. But lately, I felt the earth shifting again. Little things at first. A knock at the tool shed door when no one's there. Gravel moved around plot 11C, even though I haven't touched it in years. Fog that lingers longer than it should. And last week, I found a name scrawled on the inside of the shed wall, etched with something sharp. Ellie Whitaker 2040. I scrubbed it out. Twice. The third time, it came back on its own. Cleaner. Straighter. Like someone was practicing. I can't protect her forever. That's not how this works. The land remembers the blood it's tasted, and it keeps accounts. Which is why I'm writing this. For the next gravedigger. For whoever ends up standing where I stood, holding a shovel in one hand, and a choice in the other. There are rules. Not the ones you're told, the ones you feel. If the fog curls clockwise around your boots, leave. If you hear your name in the wind, it's not the wind. If the coffin knocks, don't knock back. If a plot refuses the body, find a name. Or it will. Never bury after sundown. Never look back after you seal the earth. And above all, if the ledger writes your name, it already knows the ending. I've left everything in the locked box under the floorboards. The keys in the false drawer in the desk. The ledger. The names. And the choices I made. If you're reading this, it means your spring has come, and the question will return with it. Is my name on the stone yet? If the answer's no, you've still got time. If the answer's yes, then you already know what to do. I'll be gone by then, either from this town or from this life. but I'll still be here in the ground, in the fog, in the bones of hollow pines, because once you keep the pact, you never really leave. They told me the job came with a cottage, a truck, and plenty of quiet. That last part sold me. After a divorce, a blown knee, and 30 years of chasing freight across state lines, I was tired of noise, tired of being looked at, tired of the past dragging behind me like a busted tailpipe. Graveyard work. Hell. It sounded peaceful. Hollow Pines isn't much to look at now. Town's barely a dot on the map, and half the houses have boards on the windows. But the cemetery, it's still here. Stone markers lean like old men who've seen too much. And the trees lean too, toward something. I took the job on a Tuesday. The cemetery office was thick with dust, and the coffee pot had a spider in it. No welcome sign. No manager. Just a note taped to the desk. You'll figure it out. Stay out of Plot 9B. If the fog talks, don't answer. And at the bottom, a name I didn't recognize. Sam Whitaker. I assumed it was a joke, until that night. Until I found the box under the floorboards. There was a key inside, a worn black ledger, a photo of a man in his 50s, shovel in hand, standing under a leafless tree. On the back, tell her I remembered. Every spring. I didn't know what it meant. Still don't. Not really. But the next morning, I walked Plot 9B anyway. Just to see. Nothing there. Not even a stone. Just a patch of dirt that felt wrong. Soft. Breathing. Maybe, like it hadn't quite settled, I dropped the shovel and walked away. But that night, the ledger wrote something new on its last page. Caretaker. Egg. And slowly, my name began to etch itself in. I didn't write it. Swear on my life I didn't. But there it is, inked clean and straight, like it's always been there. This morning, I saw her. A girl, maybe 9 or 10, dressed like she stepped out of a different decade, dressed to the ankles, hair in braids, eyes too old. She was standing by the iron fence at the edge of the grounds. Didn't move. Didn't blink. Just watched. And before I could ask who she was, she whispered, "Is my name on the stone yet?" I didn't answer, because in that moment, I wasn't sure if she was asking me or if she already knew.